Good morning. This is episode 2 of Dana's Pony. And this week we'll get the sprue and the vents mounted on the pony and get him in the mold case. There are some real challenges molding this pony, and mostly they come from the fact that Dana wants the model back and she'd like to have it in more or less at one piece. And that's difficult in this case because the challenge is that this model is heavy and it's fragile. It's made of Sculpey, I think, and it's not very strong, and it's got wire armatures like down in the legs and everything. So this model has to balance on this 1 foot down in here. It has to be connected to the mold case just by this 1 foot. It'd be so simple if I could just drill a hole down into this nice thick base. One of the reasons I use nice thick bases is so you can drill down into them to put in supports. If you have a really thin base, you can hardly attach anything to it if you're going to use like screws or steel fasteners. But here's the thing. This sprue has to be really strong. It has to hold up a pretty heavy model all by itself inside, and once the rubber is poured around it, no worries, the rubber is going to support the model. But until the rubber is poured around it, there's nothing holding up this heavy model except for that attachment. And so, it'd be really easy for me to just run a 1/4 inch piece of steel down into the base and drill up into the leg as far as I could possibly go, epoxy the whole thing together, and do a build-up like with epoxy clay and make a nice sprue. Well, simple, easy, right? But here's the thing: Dana wants the model. Dana wants the model back. Normally, if it was my piece, when I plan a sculpture, I don't think about the thing I'm sculpting. I think about the casting of the thing I'm sculpting. To me, the end product is always the casting. So I don't really care if the model gets busted up in the molding process. It's likely to. And I have told Dana I'm going to do everything in my power not to break this model, but it might get broken. It just might. And so I could run a 1/4 inch steel rod through into this thick base and up into this leg. I could epoxy the whole thing together, be super strong, no problem holding up the model. But here's the problem. When I go to take the mold case apart and take the model off, how am I going to get the thing apart? So that sprue has to do 2 things at once. It has to hold up a heavy model securely so it'll allow me to pour rubber around it and not break off. Last thing you want to have happen to you is you're halfway through an expensive pour of rubber. This is a couple pounds of rubber here. It's going to cost real money. So you don't want the sprue to break off in the middle of the pour. It has to be strong enough to hold everything together, hold the thing up. If I can't pop the base off the bottom of the sprue, I'm going to break that leg trying to get that thing out of here. So like so many things in life, mold making and casting is a trade-off where you're like holding up a lot of different variables and you're balancing them against one another, and you're trying to figure out what the best solution is. And it can be really tricky. That's really the hardest thing here. Once we get that sprue built and installed, the pour should go relatively well. Enough talk. Let's get going and see what happens. Okay, so the first step is we're going to take these sides off like that, set them aside for a moment. And I need to prop up the pony because he's laying on the side, on one side of the box, and that's no good. Obviously, you can't have him on contact with the box. There's got to be up and away, so there's a thickness of rubber. So I'm just going to use some oil clay, piece of oil clay. And I don't want to get oil clay all over Dana's model. So keeping in mind we're trying to protect the model, I'm just going to cover it with a little foil. That'll let me still raise it up approximately the amount I need. About like that. Let's see if that's about going to be right. Put these back in place and check the position. This whole time I'm going to be really checking my positioning of the model because I don't want to get it into position and then have it not fit inside the box. So let's get it into position. Center-wise, yeah, let me see here. Where's the box on this side? Oh yeah, lots of clearance, lots of clearance on that side. I'm good on clearance over that foot. Very important to clear this foot, but I'm good on that. So yeah, I think he's just about right. I'm looking down all around to make sure that I get it in position and that I have the proper amount of rubber all around the model. That's super important. So now we can take this apart and we can contemplate how we're going to build the sprue. That's going to be super important. So how we're going to do it is we're going to use this handy dandy little piece of sign foam. This stuff is super light, but that's not what matters. What matters here is it's super strong and it's really easy to work. And I'm just going to trace it out, put it under here like that, and trace it out. It's going to fit on there like that, more or less. You can kind of see that, I hope. Does that line up with your view? Anyway, it's going to go on there like that. So let's head on over to the jigsaw and cut that out. About the hardest thing about cutting sign foam is that it cuts so fast and so easy. It's hard. It's almost hard to control it. Beautiful. Love it. Let's go get this thing made. Time to attach some vents. And the venting is going to come off the high edges. This thing's going to sit more or less like this. And that means that the high edge is going to be here, right in here. This edge is high, so mark it. And then up here is going to come off of here. Right about there. The slanting is in here. The upside. I don't want to make too big a mark on there, but anyway, right in there. And I don't just want to attach a pipe like that because I still would catch bubbles along this edge. So I want to do a little bit of a buildup on each edge. So let's get going on that. You'll see what I'm talking about as I do it. Just going to start laying beads of wax on the edge. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the air to not trap along the whole edge. It means a little more cleanup on the finished sculpture. See, I prefer to cut excess resin off a casting rather than fill bubbles and then have to clean up. It's a lot more labor to have to fill a bunch of bubbles. I don't like filling bubbles. Bubbles are no good. You do not want to be filling bubbles. It's better to have excess resin to cut off a casting than it is to have to fill bubbles and then, clean up a casting. It's just bubbles. I hate bubbles. My whole life is a battle against bubbles. It's like the bubble wars around here. It's all it comes down to. It's just moving the air out of the way. So what I'm building up here, these little buildups are going to allow the air to move out of the tips of the hooves. And that's the whole point. Much, much better than filling bubbles. At the same time, you don't want to make them too gigantic because then it's just that much more work. It's all a balancing act. Everything's a balancing act in this business. So now that I have the wax built up enough, I'm just going to make sure I go through and just kind of smooth it out in the connections a little bit. The part that I'm just kind of fussing with here is never going to be part of the finished casting. So I'm not overly worried about it. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of smooth the transitions in here a little bit. Not a big deal. Get these things ready to go. That's really all I need. Now, when all that's done, which it basically is, we're going to put the sprue on like that. You see that? It's going to go up like that. It's going to rise right out. And that's all the channel you're going to need to get that air to rise right out of that foot. Now, the other thing we need to do is to fit this sprue on here a little bit better. So it could be a little flatter in there. I'm going to carve this flat in here. That'd be about all I need. Just a little bit of carving. Yeah, now see, that fits a lot better. All right, good. I determined that I needed more meat on the foot, on the sprue foot. And so I glued this little block on with 5-minute epoxy, most of which is going to be trimmed off. The next thing we're going to need to do is, I know there's going to be some kind of an angle on there, but I haven't determined what it is. So I'm going to see if we can't come around and determine what the angle is that will match the angle of the foot to the sprue so that it'll all fit together. Trick to this is to hold this into position the way it's got to be. It's going to be in here like that.
I hold that at the angle of the foot, about like that, and this will be like that. Something roughly in there. It's a very shallow cut. Just kind of find it. Something like that.
Let me go nick that off on the bandsaw and see what I got. See how close I came. That'll be fun. Okay, here we are, back in business. Okay, so I cut that off, I nicked that off on the bandsaw, and then we're gonna go in here and see how much further we're gonna have to take it. I'm not that far away. Let me stand up here and see. Sort of like that. Ooh, not bad. Look at that. Look at that fit. Holy moly. It's almost like I know what I'm doing. Look at that fit. Very, very nice. All right. I love it when a plan comes together. All right. I got the little foot, the little sprue foot. Looks like a shoe now. Looks like a hiking boot. I got it all sculpted up, nice and pretty. I use these very high-tech sculpting tools. An aluminum tube and sandpaper. Nice. Okay, this is ready to go. So now what I'm going to do is fire up the old waxer. I'm going to wax the entire body of it except where it epoxies to the foot, because you don't want to wax where you're going to epoxy, because wax will resist epoxy. I want this to be as smooth as possible. I just want it to be slick and smooth. And I don't want it to have, you know, a lot of resistance to coming apart. And so if this sprue is waxed, it's just going to come apart really nice, and it's not going to fight me. You know, when it's time to take the mold apart, I'm thinking ahead to when I have to take this mold apart, and I really don't want this kid to fight me. We'll get this thing waxed up nice, and we'll go forward. I got this sprue waxed. I got it sticky waxed, blue waxed, and epoxied. And I'm adjusting it now and sticking it to the foot. One of the things I like to do is I like to mix up my epoxy, and then I let it get pretty hard before I attach the two pieces together. That way it more or less stays in place. So there's our sprue, looking pretty good. And now I'm going to make the connection between the sprue and the foot with wax. And I'm going to use sculpting wax for this, so I can modify it and change it and sculpt it and this and that. We'll just lay this wax in there, right, like that. Using this wax because I'm going to want to refine this connection, no doubt, with some sculpting. And this is a sculpting wax. Just what it's for. The craft and the care that you take when you're doing this part of the project helps you later on down the line. You know, when it comes time to clean up the castings, the more time you put into crafting these kinds of connections, the less time you're going to have to put into cleaning up castings. And that's why, you know, it's worth the effort. It's worth the time, I think, to do this part of the job neatly and tight, so that you have less to fix later on each casting. The only thing that's holding this sprue to the foot is a bond of 5-minute epoxy. But I didn't put anything up into the leg. I didn't put any, you know, I didn't do any damage to the foot. And hopefully this sprue is weaker than the foot. But when I remove the sprue from the foot, if anything, I want to destroy the sprue. I don't want to destroy the foot. I want to, we keep reminding you we're trying to preserve the model as best we can. So I'm putting more effort into that than I normally would when I don't care about the model and I only care about the casting. All right, I'm going to let this epoxy cure for a good solid half an hour, even though it's 5-minute epoxy, and it's probably reached most of its strength. The reason that I'm so concerned about supporting the model inside the mold case while we pour the rubber is that it's really only supported by the sprue, because using this blue wax for vent material works great, but the problem is it's really bendy. It's It does not support any weight at all. I mean, it's just, forget about it. It's so bendy. So instead, I'll do it a different way. And that is, I'm going to use 1/8" dowel to support the model. This will make a perfectly good air vent, and it's rigid. It will really support the model. It can carry the weight really well. There'll be beautiful vents like that, and like that, and like that. We'll just get it. And of course, we'll use wax as our connection between the wood and the foot. All right. How strong is this? Is this strong enough to test? Oh man, oh man, oh man. Oh, I think, oh boy. I'm just not going to mess with this connection till it's had plenty of time to cure. Hey, while we're at it, let's see how it fits in the box. Look at that. Look at that thing fitting there. Woo! Look at our beautiful pour funnel sprue. Actually, this is just a pour funnel in that. The whole leg is the sprue. That thing is going to fit in there. Almighty. How much space do we have on top of that unicorn corn? Plenty. Look at that. Nice. Okay. So a little tight in here, but as I told you before, projections that come close to the edge of the rubber, that usually doesn't bother you. As long as you've got a nice amount of meat around it, and you don't have, this should not touch, obviously, down in here. But as long as you've got, I've got a solid, almost 1/4 inch of rubber, that's enough. And then, of course, now we'll be able to determine the length of these vents. This one vent's going to be long. And these 2 vents here are going to help, definitely help, to support the weight of the pony. All right, I'm pretty pleased. We are making good progress. Let's let everything cure up, and then we'll go ahead and get those vents put on. All right, the time is upon us, and we're going to attach this pony to this base. So let's see how this goes. What I'm going to do is I put sticky wax on the base, and I put sticky wax on the bottom of the sprue, or the funnel, or whatever you wish to call it. I'm going to have my waxer ready to go. Just in case, I'm going to do a little experiment here. I have a little butane pen. This thing is highly unreliable, to be quite honest. It's not the king of reliability. We're going to see if it works. Let's just see if I can get this thing to light. Who even knows if I can get this thing to light? If I can, it'll put pinpoint heat exactly where I want it, which is a good thing. So let's strike a match. Look at that. All right, let's heat this sticky wax. See, told you it was unreliable. This thing's really old, by the way. Let's do it this way. Let's put the sticky wax up on top of it. Boom, it's done. Done. Turn that off, put that in place, and let's get this thing bonded. Wow, that sticky wax, oh yeah, that sticky wax was nice and wet. Nice. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but it worked, it worked. All right, love it when it works. Thank you for that low-tech system. See those holes in there? The point to those holes is I'm going to put a dowel in there, and those holes will just hold on to the dowels enough to make it easy for me to install them. And I already cut this first vent, as you can see, and it fits super nice. So to get the other one in place, it's a little tiny bit tricky. You need to figure out the lengths and slide that down into that hole. Hold that in position, and I'm going to say right about here on that one. Right about there on that one. And this one down here is even worse. We'll be, you know what? We're going to have to wait on that one. Okay. So we'll wait on that one until we get it up off of there. But in the meantime, we'll cut this one. Let's get this one cut. Jesus Christ, you'd think an 1/8" dowel would be easy to cut. All right. Let's get this one in there and see if it fits. Fit on in there. Okay, it is super close to fitting. So close to fitting, I'm inclined to trim the wax rather than the dowel. Okay, close enough. We're going to melt that thing into place. Here we go. Just take the wax pen and make a nice connection between the landing that I built on each toe and the wooden vent. Same up here. Just going to build that up, get that in place. We want them to be nice and strong because they're going to contribute to holding up the pony. Now comes the risky business. Set him up. All right. And by setting him up, now you can see how he's sitting in there. Really nice. What we want to do is we want to fill these sockets up with wax. And I'm going to stick my waxer down in there, that tip in there, and keep it hot. So that's a puddle, hot puddle of wax going down in there, just completely filling that hole and bonding that in there. Same with on this one over here. Do the exact same thing. Come in from here and flow that wax in. Boy, I hope you guys can see some of this stuff in action. This is not how I would normally do my vents, but in this case, I feel like it's the way to go because they're definitely, that's pretty sturdy. I'm happy with that, boy. Well, that is pretty darn sturdy. Let's see about this last one. Getting this last one in here. Out there. We'll get this one in here. And hopefully my cameras won't die or overheat by the time I'm done with this business. Okay, and we'll just get the wax hot. There it is. He's right on. Okay, beautiful. Nice. Same thing with this hole. Run molten wax down into it. The wood wants to cool the wax really fast, so we keep the wax tip down in there. Keep that wax molten, and it'll just flow around. Fill that hole right on up. In last week's video, you saw these little shoes laying on the table, and Dana sent them along with her pony and asked me to make a mold and cast some copies. So I'm doing it. They're really pretty simple. The only sort of fun complexity that they have is that the toes are hollow. So we got to get the rubber down in there when we pour them. Other than that, pretty straightforward. So all I did to get this far, I did most of this off camera. I grubbed through my fabulous and enormous funnel collection, found a small funnel. There's a little 1/8-inch wooden dowel in there. Built a little wax tree. And the only thing left to do now is to attach the other vent, which I'm going to do right here, and just stick it on, weld it on better, cut it off with the heat. All right. And then it's simple enough matter to attach it. Just a few drops of wax. Get it attached nicely. All right. So now they're attached. So now they're going to hang in the mold like this. And the resin will, when we pour it, the resin will run down the middle and into the branches of the tree, fall in, and then rise up. And they'll vent out the toes. So when it's set up like this, as you can see, you know, every time you cast one of these shoes, you're going to have to sand and clean the toe. But you'll see that when they come out. But otherwise, this simple little setup should make nice castings of this object. Well, we got the sprue and the vents put on this pony, and I'm really pleased with how it came out. I'm surprised by how strong it is and how sturdy it is. I was really worried that it would be pretty delicate and hard to handle, but it looks like it's going to be easy to pour. Next week we'll pour the rubber and cut the mold open, and that'll be a whole nother new adventure. Hey, if you like this video, hit the like button. We've got a ton of new subscribers, and I really, really appreciate everyone who has signed up. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your comments and all your questions. It's really fun for me to hear what you guys are working on. After this, I think we have 3 viewer projects in line. They're all super interesting, and I'm looking forward to working on those. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. And I'll see you next week.